Hey there, dirt bike people. I'm Chuck from TrueTech, and today I'm going to be disassembling a YZ250 engine. This is a modern YZ250, and they're pretty much the same from about 99 to current. Alright, so here's the deal with this engine. The customer was having a shifting issue and decided to ship me the engine to repair. At this point I had no idea this would turn into a project. First order of business is to check out the top end. I was expecting it to be due for a piston, but the big question was the Nickesil. If the Nickesil is good, it's a cheap top end. If it's worn out, it adds a bunch of time and money to the bill. Pulling the stator cover is always a no-brainer during a top end. It allows me to easily rotate the engine and also lets me check the left side crank bearing and the crank seal. Here I'm checking for play in the crank bearing. It's nice and tight, so that's a good start. At this point in the job, I really have no idea if I'm going to end up doing an engine rebuild. My goal is to get the most amount of information as fast as possible. If the customer decides not to go ahead with the repair, I want to waste as little time as possible. Once the engine is on the bench, I should be able to have a rough estimate within half an hour. Things are looking good here with no evident leak from the crank seal. Usually when I get an engine in a box, it comes with things like the case saver and the sprocket, oftentimes a shifter and the kickstart, so I have to remove it like this. It's not a big deal because the impact vibrates it nicely and it comes off pretty easily. Because of the design of the countershaft seal on the YZ, it's often difficult to get the collar out. Since it's not a priority at the moment, I'm not putting much effort into it. It's time to get this top end apart as quickly as possible. These little screws here are JIS screws. A lot of people find them difficult to deal with, but the key to getting them out easily is simply having a JIS screwdriver. This snap-on screwdriver is JIS. I don't actually have to remove the power valve cover to get the top end apart, but I want to have a look in there just to make sure nothing's busted. This is the moment of truth right here. Once the cylinder's off, I learn a whole bunch about this engine. The first place I look is at the top of the ring travel. If there's significant Nickesil wear, I'll feel a little ridge here. Just above the exhaust port is another common problem area. That's where the most heat is, and usually the most wear. On this cylinder though, as soon as I flip it over, the wear becomes really obvious. You can see all around the intake port there's that aluminum shading. This cylinder's done. Just for a point of reference here, the ring end gap ended up being 23 thou. A quick look at the underside of the piston shows evidence of decent jetting and hard riding. And now for the meat and potatoes. If there's any up and down play in the rod, it's time for a crank. This one didn't really have any up and down play. It was a little bit looser than I would expect side to side, but that's pretty subjective. Two strokes need a lot of side to side play to allow the premix to lubricate the big end bearing. I know that there's a lot of hours on it because of the cylinder, and I know that it's been ridden hard. This is definitely one of those cases where I present the situation to the customer. The crank might live a while yet, but since we have a shifting issue, I have to take the bottom end apart anyway. Let's see what we find down there. Immediately, I can tell that the clutch is in really good shape. Once clutches get a lot of wear, the pressure plate often has grooves in it. This one has none. When I pull the plates out, I'm looking for blue steels and hardened frictions. I use my fingernail to try and dig chunks out of the frictions. If I can dig chunks out easily, I know that they're good. If it's like a chalkboard, I know that they're done. The grooving in the basket is also minimal, and the clutch dampers are nice and tight. The rest of the right side disassembly went pretty smoothly, but I was starting to see some shrapnel and signs that there might be bigger problems when I open up the transmission. Another little bit of foreshadowing happened when I tried to split the cases. The right case half should come off pretty easily. They often still provide a bit of resistance, but they usually do come off without too much trouble. This one was stuck. At this point, even if the bearings weren't bad to begin with, they were certainly toast after I pulled on them super hard with the puller and I hit them with a hammer. I also quickly found the source of all the shrapnel. The shift forks were burnished, the gear dogs were rounded, and the teeth were chipped. So now we were looking at tranny parts, a crank rebuild, and Nickesil. I called up the customer to deliver the news. There wasn't much math involved in figuring out that with my labor added to the parts, he would have significantly more into the bike than what it'd be worth once it was finished. He'd been thinking about upgrading anyway, so it was an easy call. The YZ would not be going back together. I do not need a project. I mean, if you're gonna do a project, the YZ250 is the one to do because the parts are everywhere. The engine's been the same since like 99. They've had the same suspension forever, but I don't need a project. I have enough stuff to do. A bike with a 19-inch wheel is worth nothing around here. So by the time I do a crank, I do the transmission, I might as well put the X tranny in it. Got a really nice pipe on it. Suspension's in good shape. Bars are straight, the levers are good. The grips are even good. It doesn't have hand guards. If I turned this thing into a proper woods bike, maybe I could get, maybe like $4,000 for it? I have been thinking for years that if I had a YZ, I would love to try and make a custom flywheel for it. Could I do this for $4,000 in parts? Well, at the end of the day, I figured if I can get this thing for 500 bucks, there might be a chance that I can get out of it what I put into it. You know, I don't really need a project. So if you're interested in watching what happens with this thing, subscribe, hit the notification bell, comment, like, all that stuff. What do you think? Can I make a decent woods bike out of a YZ250? How much money do you think I can lose with this project? I don't know what's gonna happen, but what I can tell you is that I'll let you know.